The forgetting began not with a roar, but with a statistical whisper, a rounding error in the census of the world. Dr. Aris Thorne was the first to hear it, not because he was a prophet, but because his entire life was a study in cosmic silence. In his subterranean office at the Arecibo Deep Field Archive, surrounded by the digital ghosts of dead civilizations, he hunted for patterns in the static between galaxies. He was a historian of exclamations that had faded into the void, a cosmic archaeologist sifting through the dust of stars that had died before humanity had learned to walk upright. His obsession was the Great Filter, the theoretical barrier that snipped civilizations in the bud. And he believed the answer wasn't in the noise they made, but in the specific quality of the silence they left behind. So, when the silence of Earth began to change, he felt it like a shift in barometric pressure. It started with a village in the Peruvian Amazon, a small settlement of the Mashco Piro people that had been recently and controversially contacted. One Tuesday, they were a headline, a subject of anthropological debate. By Friday, they were gone. Not wiped out. Not relocated, gone. Satellite imagery showed undisturbed jungle canopy where the village had been just days before. Digital archives returned 404 errors. The anthropologists who had written papers on them now had gaps in their publication histories and a nagging feeling of lost time. Aris only noticed because his long-range atmospheric sensors, designed to filter out terrestrial interference, registered a fleeting, anomalous energy spike in that exact location, a flicker of something that bent space-time just enough to be noticed, before it vanished. He logged it as a curiosity, a ghost in the machine. Then a fishing town on the Kamchatka Peninsula disappeared, then an entire atoll in the Marshall Islands. Each time, the same signature, a quiet, localized ripple in reality. And then, nothing. The world didn't scream. It just adjusted. The collective human consciousness was like water. It simply flowed into the new empty spaces, and the holes were forgotten. He tried to warn someone. He presented his findings to the Global Defense Consortium, a body so mired in bureaucracy they treated his data like an academic prank. He showed them the disappearing data points, the corrupted historical records, the phantom energy signatures. They saw a man obsessed with ghosts, pointing at empty spaces in a map and claiming cities used to be there. They politely dismissed him, suggesting a long overdue sabbatical. It was only when Florence vanished that the world began to feel the chill. It happened over the course of 17 minutes during a bustling tourist afternoon. It wasn't an explosion of fire and light. It was an erasure, a slow, shimmering fade, like a watercolor painting left out in the rain. One moment, the Ponte Vecchio was thronged with people. The Duomo stood proud against the Tuscan sky. The next, there was only a serene, featureless landscape of rolling green hills under a placid sun. The Arno River flowing through it as if it had never known the touch of stone bridges. The people didn't scream or run. They simply faded with their city, their thoughts, their memories, their art, dissolving into a conceptual nothingness. The world felt it not as a shock, but as a profound and inexplicable sadness, a species-wide pang of grief for a loss it couldn't name. Tourists in Rome suddenly felt a strange emptiness, as if they'd forgotten a key part of their itinerary. Art historians stared at blank spots in Renaissance timelines, their minds unable to formulate the questions that were missing. It was a lobotomy performed on the soul of civilization. That evening, they came for Eris, not the dismissive bureaucrats, but a different kind of authority. Two figures in severe, unmarked black fatigues met him outside the archive, their faces grim and devoid of surprise. Their leader, a woman with iron gray hair cut short and the dead eyes of someone who had seen the abyss and found it wanting, introduced herself only as Director Eva Rostovi. She didn't ask him if he was right. She told him he was late. They took him on a hypersonic transport that flew without windows, a sterile tube designed to deny its occupants any sense of place or time. We call them the silencers, Rostova said, her voice a low monotone that cut through the engine's hum. It's not a conquest. It's a correction. They target informational density, culture, history, language, art, the very things that define a sentient species. To them, we are a chaotic anomaly, a discordant note in a symphony of perfect, ordered silence. They don't destroy, Dr. Thorne. They unwrite. Eris felt a cold dread that was part vindication and part terror. His cosmic ghosts were real, and they were hunting. "How do you know this?" he asked, his voice hoarse. Rostova gestured to the empty space around them. "Because my organization was founded by people who believed in ghosts, just like you. We are the curators of last resorts. We are Project Chimera." She explained that for 70 years. Chimera had existed in the deepest shadows of global governments, a clandestine initiative tasked with preparing for threats that fell outside the logic of conventional warfare. They had prepared for alien invasions, rogue AI, dimensional incursions, all the fever dreams of science fiction. But they had also prepared for this, a war of existence itself. Your former mentor, Dr. Alistair Finch, was our founder, she added, watching his face for a reaction. Eris flinched. Finch had been his brilliant, erratic teacher, a man who had pioneered the field of xenoarchaeology before disappearing into private research, disgraced by theories the academic world deemed insane. He had spoken of a weaponized mimetic plague and the need for a civilizational anchor. Alistair had been right all along. He believed that the only defense against an enemy that erases reality is to create a reality so dense, so fundamentally true, that it cannot be erased. Rostova continued, "A place that could remember us back into existence if we were forgotten." The transport began its descent, a subtle shift in gravity the only indicator. He called it the echo chamber. When the doors opened, the cold hit Eris like a physical blow. It was a dry, sterile cold that stripped the moisture from his lungs, the air so thin it felt sharp. They were in Antarctica, standing on a vast, windswept plateau of ice under a sky bruised with the purples and pinks of the perpetual twilight. Before them was a structure that defied logic, a single, seamless spire of black, unknown material that plunged deep into the ice sheet, looking less like a building and more like a scar on the face of the planet. This was Site Kronos, the most secret place on Earth. Inside, the facility was a stark contrast of brutalist concrete and impossibly advanced technology. They descended for miles in a silent, magnetically levitated elevator, passing levels dedicated to geothermal power, atmospheric processing, and closed-loop ecosystems. It was a self-contained world, a tomb built for a species that wasn't dead yet. At the heart of it all was the chamber itself. Eris stepped onto an observation deck overlooking a cavern so vast it had its own weather patterns. Suspended in the center of this chasm was a perfect sphere, 100 meters in diameter, crafted from a shimmering, crystalline substance that seemed to absorb and refract light in impossible ways. This was the Mnemosyne Matrix, the core of Alistair's grand design. "It's a quantum repository," Rostova explained, her voice echoing in the cavernous space. "Every book ever written, every piece of art, every song, every scientific formula, every human memory captured through passive mimetic resonance scans over the last 50 years. It's all in there. Not stored as data, but woven into the quantum state of the matrix itself. It is the complete, superpositioned story of humanity." Eris stared, mesmerized. It was beautiful and terrifying, the ultimate expression of human arrogance, a monument built to outlast God. "Alistair believed it could act as a bastion," Rostova said. "That if the silencers tried to erase a part of our reality, the Matrix would actively resist, its quantum state refusing to decohere into the new, empty version. It would hold the pattern, the memory, of what was supposed to be there. But he died before he could complete the final attunement. The Matrix is active, but it's passive. It's recording, but it isn't protecting. It's not broadcasting our truth." She turned to him, her gaze intense. Alistair's final logs stated that the attunement required a specific frequency, a key, one that couldn't be calculated by a machine, but had to be derived from a deep, intuitive understanding of informational decay patterns. He said it needed not a soldier or an engineer, but a historian of silence. "It needs you, Dr. Thorne. You are the final component." A klaxon suddenly blared, a jarring, ugly sound in the pristine silence of the chamber. Red lights flashed across the observation deck. A technician ran up to Rostova, his face pale. "Director, we have a cascade failure in the global network. It's London, Moscow, and Beijing. All at once. They're fading." Aris looked from the panicked technician to the impassive face of Rostova, and then down at the shimmering, silent sphere hanging in the abyss below. 3 of the world's greatest cities were being unwritten from existence, and he was standing at the edge of the world, tasked with reminding the universe that humanity had ever existed at all. The weight of every forgotten soul, every erased memory, and every silent scream settled onto his shoulders. He was no soldier, no hero. He was a quiet man who studied ghosts. And now, he had to teach a ghost how to fight. As he stepped towards the console that would interface him with the Matrix, a new, more personal terror gripped him. If he failed, he wouldn't just die. He, and everyone he had ever known, would become nothing more than a statistical whisper, a rounding error in the census of a silent universe. The console was not a seat of power, but a throne of sacrifice. It was a cold, ergonomic chair of polished obsidian composite, cradled within a semicircle of holographic emitters. There were no wires, no needles, only a heavy cowl that descended from the ceiling and hovered inches from Eris's skull, humming with a low, bone-deep thrum. It was a neural resonance interface designed to align the quantum state of his consciousness with the Mnemosyne Matrix. He was not going to operate a machine. He was going to become a part of it. Rostova stood beside him, her face a mask of calculated resolve. "The decay in the target cities is accelerating," she said, her voice flat, betraying no emotion. "They are becoming conceptually unstable. We're getting reports of paradoxes, buildings existing and not existing in the same space, time looping in city blocks. The silencers are not just deleting, they are corrupting the source code of reality. She placed a heavy hand on his shoulder. The matrix will feel infinite. Do not let it consume you. Find a single thread, an anchor. Find the frequency Alistair was looking for. Eris nodded, his mouth too dry for words. He took a deep breath, the sterile, recycled air of the bunker tasting of ozone and finality, and gave the signal. The world dissolved. It was not a plunge into darkness, but an explosion into everything. His consciousness, once a tidy vessel of thoughts and memories contained within a single skull, was ripped open and poured into an ocean of existence. He was not seeing, but experiencing. He felt the rough texture of the first cave painting in Chauvet, the smooth marble of the Parthenon under a sculptor's hand, the searing heat of the Library of Alexandria burning. He heard not just sounds, but the emotional timbre of every word ever spoken, every song ever sung, every lie ever whispered. It was a hurricane of qualia, a storm of pure information that threatened to tear his sense of self into a billion scattered fragments. He was Eris Thorne, and he was a nameless legionary dying at the Battle of Teutoburg Forest. He was Marie Curie discovering radium, and he was the atom of radium she held, decaying. He was everyone and everything, and therefore, he was nothing. The self, his anchor to sanity, was disintegrating. Find a single thread, Rostova's words, a faint echo from a world away. How could he find a thread in this cataclysm of being? It was like trying to find a single grain of sand in a supernova. He fought against the current, trying to remember his purpose, but the memories of 1,000,000,000,000 lives drowned out his own. Then he felt it, a cold spot in the raging, chaotic heat of human experience. There was a patch of utter nullity, a spreading stain of absolute zero. It was the presence of the silencers, the anti-existence, manifesting within the matrix itself. The null wave. It wasn't violent. It was worse. It was seductive. It offered a quiet peace, a release from the overwhelming noise of existence. He could feel it touching the edges of the matrix's construct of London. The memory of Big Ben didn't shatter. Its chime just simplified, losing its harmonic complexity, becoming a single, dull tone, then fading into a hum, then silence. The intricate poetry of Shakespeare, stored within the matrix's memory of the Globe Theater, was being unwritten, the verses collapsing into repetitive, meaningless phrases, the meaning bleeding out of them until only the shapes of the letters remained, and then they too dissolved. This was the enemy, not a fleet of ships, but a creeping, inexorable logic of simplification, the ultimate heat death of the soul. His terror gave him focus. He was a historian of silence. He understood this language. He stopped fighting the torrent of information and instead let himself drift towards the cold. He used the absence as his compass. As he drew closer to the spreading void, he saw how it worked. It targeted connections, the synapses of civilization. It didn't destroy memories. It isolated them, severing them from their context until they were meaningless artifacts, which then simply ceased to be. He needed a connection that was stronger than their erasure. He needed a memory so dense with meaning, so fundamentally true, that it could not be isolated. He reached for his own past, for the man who had started all of this, Alistair. He didn't search for Finch's grand theories or his complex equations. He searched for a simple, quiet moment. He found it. A rainy afternoon in his mentor's dusty university office, Eris, then a young, eager student, was holding a fossil, an ammonite, its perfect spiral a testament to time and pressure. Alistair had leaned over, his eyes bright with a feverish passion. "You see, Aris," he had said, his voice a low conspiratorial whisper. "This isn't a rock. It's a story of life, of mathematics, of extinction, and of survival. It's a perfect question with no one left to answer it. Our job, our privilege, is to learn how to listen to its silence." In that single memory was everything, teacher and student, past and future, knowledge, curiosity, wonder, and the profound, beautiful sadness of cosmic loneliness. It was a perfect, self-contained loop of meaning. It was an anchor. Eris grabbed onto that memory with the entirety of his fragmenting consciousness. He held the fossil in his mind's eye, felt its weight, traced its divine spiral. He focused on the look in Alistair's eyes, the sheer, unadulterated joy of discovery. He took this perfect, tiny story and held it up against the encroaching silence. The null wave touched it, and, for the first time, it recoiled. The void could not simplify this. The memory was irreducible. It was a conceptual prime number, emboldened. Eris did the only thing he could think of. He didn't build a wall. He told a story. He pushed the memory of Alistair and the fossil outwards, using it as a seed. From it, he let the matrix extrapolate. The story of the fossil connected to the story of evolution, which connected to the story of geology, to the story of carbon, to the story of stars. The single thread began to weave a tapestry. He wasn't just defending London, Moscow, and Beijing anymore. He was reminding the Matrix what they were. He was reestablishing their context. He pushed the memory of Tchaikovsky's 1812 overture not as a sound, but as a defiant act of national identity born from the fires of a Moscow invasion. He broadcast the dense, chaotic, multicultural story of London's Brick Lane, a single street that had held Huguenots, Irish, Jews, and Bengalis, a living history of refuge and change. The null wave slowed, its advance stymied by the sheer, stubborn complexity of the reality Aris was projecting. It was a battle of attrition, a conceptual war fought on the shores of existence. In the real world, Aris's body convulsed in the chair. Blood trickled from his nose and ears. His vitals spiked into the red. "He's fighting it!" a tech yelled. "The decay has halted. The city signatures are stabilizing. He's reinforcing them." Rostova watched the holographic map of the world, where three ghostly, shimmering outlines of the lost cities had stopped fading. They were still gone from the physical world, but on her screen, they were holding their shape like a persistent afterimage burned into the fabric of reality. "Keep him stable," she commanded, her voice cracking for the first time. "Give him whatever he needs." Back inside the Matrix, Eris was no longer just a man. He was a conduit, a living nexus point between a quantum computer and a cosmic horror. He was holding the line, but he could feel the pressure of the void building, adapting. The silence was no longer just a passive emptiness. It was becoming strategic. It was learning from his defense, analyzing the connections he was making, and looking for weaker points to attack. And as he held the memory of his mentor aloft like a shield, he felt a chilling, terrifying flicker from the other side of the void. It was a fleeting sensation, a ghost of a thought that wasn't his. It was a whisper of cold, analytical curiosity, a touch of a mind so vast and ancient it made the entire sum of human knowledge feel like a child's scrawl. The silencers were not just a force. They were aware, and they were now aware of him. The awareness was a scalpel. As Eris reinforced the conceptual reality of the three cities, weaving their histories into a defiant, unbreakable knot. He felt the silencer's attention shift from a passive pressure to a focused, surgical probe. They had been trying to overwhelm the fortress of memory. Now, they were looking for the key to the front gate, and the key, they had correctly deduced, was Eris himself. The assault began not on London or Moscow, but in a dusty, sun-drenched university office that existed only in Aris's mind. He was back in the memory of Alistair Finch, the fossil cool and solid in his hand. But the memory was wrong. The light from the window was sickly and gray. The comforting smell of old books and pipe tobacco was replaced by the sterile, metallic scent of the bunker. Alistair leaned in, but his eyes, once bright with passionate curiosity, were now dark pools of ancient, cold intelligence. "Did you ever wonder why I studied silence?" Eris, his mentor's voice whispered, but the tone was alien, mocking. "You don't study a predator by shouting at it. You study it by learning its language, by becoming a part of it." The fossil in Aris's hand began to crumble, the perfect spiral turning to dust. "You think this is a story of survival. It is a story of a successful erasure, a perfect silence." Psychic shrapnel tore through Eris's consciousness. The silencers were not just attacking his anchor, they were poisoning it, retroactively rewriting his own history to instill doubt and fear. They were turning his source of strength into a source of terror. He tried to pull away, to sever his connection to that memory. But it was too late. They were inside his head. The attack cascaded through his personal history. He saw his childhood home, but the family portraits on the wall were blank, the faces erased. He heard his mother's voice calling his name, but it was a flat, synthesized tone, devoid of love. He was in his university library, pulling his favorite books from the shelves, only to find every page was empty, the stories unwritten. They were giving him a personal demonstration of their power, showing him that he was no different from the cities. He was trying to protect just another collection of memories and connections, ready to be isolated and erased. In the Antarctic Command Center, the alarms screamed. "His neural patterns are chaotic," a medic shouted, pointing at the holographic display of Aris's brain activity. "He's having a massive systemic seizure. The city signatures are flickering. He's losing control of the matrix." Rostova stared at the readouts, her knuckles white where she gripped the console railing. The ghosts of the cities on the world map wavered violently, their edges fraying like burnt paper. The silencers were bypassing the fortress and assassinating the king. "Director, we have to pull him out," the chief medical officer urged. "Another minute of this and his brain will hemorrhage. He'll be a vegetable, if he survives at all." Rostova's face was stone. "No," she said, her voice a low command that silenced the room. "He is humanity's only active defense. If he falls, we all fall. Reinforce the biostasis fields. Keep his heart beating. He is a soldier, and this is his battle. We will not let him retreat." Aris was drowning. His identity was being stripped away layer by layer. He was losing the thread of his own story. The cold, seductive peace of the void was returning, promising an end to the pain, an end to the struggle. He was just a man, A quiet, insignificant academic. Who was he to stand against a cosmic force of entropy he had been arrogant to even try? Alistair had been a madman. Chimera was a fool's errand. It was all just one lasting defiant scream before the inevitable. Eternal silence. He was ready to let go. And then something else rose through the chaos. It wasn't a memory. It was a fiction. A lie. It was the story of Prometheus. A myth he'd loved as a boy. A story of a titan who stole fire from the gods, knowing the punishment that would follow. He did it not because it was logical or safe, but because he saw a species shivering in the dark and chose to give them a chance. It was an act of pure, irrational defiance. The silencers understood truth and its absence. They could process history, data, and memory. But a myth, a lie, told to create a greater truth. This was a language they did not speak. It was a concept so alien to their logic of simplification that it acted like a paradox in their own system. A new strength surged through Eris. He realized his mistake. He had been trying to fight an eraser with a library, trying to defend the truth of the past. But the silencers were masters of that domain. The only way to win was to change the rules of the game. He couldn't just be a historian. He had to become a storyteller. He stopped defending and went on the attack. He let go of his own compromised memories and reached into the deepest, most irrational parts of the Mnemosyne matrix. He found Beethoven's Ode to Joy. Not the notes on a page, but the raw, transcendent feeling of universal brotherhood it was meant to inspire. He found the chaotic, vibrant, contradictory brushstrokes of Picasso's Guernica, a howl of protest against inhumanity. He found the absurd, hopeful dream of Don Quixote charging at windmills. He began broadcasting these fictions, humanity's art, its myths, its dreams, its magnificent, illogical lies directly at the null wave. He weaponized hope. He weaponized imagination. The effect was instantaneous and profound. The cold, analytical probe of the silencers faltered, confused. It was like trying to delete a shadow by shining a brighter light on it. These concepts had no single, verifiable origin point to erase. They were not data. They were belief. They existed because humanity had willed them into being. The pressure in Aris's mind receded. The blank faces in his memories began to fill back in. He saw Alistair's face again, not the corrupted version, but the real one, a flawed, brilliant, passionate man. He had not been a harbinger of the silence. He had been the first to raise a lantern against it. Back in the command center, the change was dramatic. The erratic spikes in Eris's neural activity smoothed out into a powerful, coherent rhythm. The signatures of the lost cities on the map solidified, their outlines glowing with a fierce, steady light. "What is he doing?" A tech asked in awe. "The energy output from the matrix it's rewriting itself. It's not just a repository anymore. It's becoming creative." Rostova allowed herself a grim, fleeting smile. Aris had survived the counterattack. He had found a new weapon. He was no longer just reminding the universe that humanity existed. He was showing it why humanity deserved to exist. But as he pushed the symphony of human imagination outwards, a warrior now in a war of ideas, he felt the silencer's consciousness shift again. The cold curiosity was gone. In its place was something new, something he recognized from the deepest, most primal parts of his being. It was anger. He had not just resisted them, he had insulted them. And the quiet war of erasure was about to become very loud. The anger of the silencers manifested not as a sound, but as a violation of physics. In the physical world, the Antarctic sky, once a placid canvas of twilight hues, tore open. It was not a cloud parting, but a rip in the fabric of space-time itself, a jagged non-Euclidean wound that bled a shimmering, oily blackness into the atmosphere. From this wound, something descended. It was not a ship in any conventional sense. It was a geometric impossibility, a constantly shifting fractal of obsidian blades and cold, dead light that seemed to absorb the very concept of color from its surroundings. It was the physical avatar of their rage, a weaponized refutation of reality. Hostile entity detected in high orbit. Descending rapidly, a sensor operator screamed, his voice cracking with disbelief. Its mass is fluctuating director. It doesn't obey the laws of conservation of energy. On the main screen, the image of the entity resolved. A nightmarish crystallization of malice that made seasoned Chimera soldiers physically recoil. It drifted down towards Site Kronos with the slow, inexorable certainty of a guillotine. Rostova's face was grim. They've changed tactics. They're done editing the book. Now they intend to burn the library. She turned to her tactical officer. Activate the Aegis protocol. All surface-to-orbit defense platforms. Fire at will. I want the thing broken into atoms before it reaches the ice. A fury of kinetic kill vehicles and plasma cannons erupted from hidden silos across the frozen continent. A silent, deadly ballet of hypersonic projectiles streaking towards the alien monolith. For a moment, it looked like a conventional defense might work. The projectiles slammed into the entity, and nothing. They did not explode. They did not ricochet. They simply ceased to be. The entity's surface rippled like disturbed water, and the kinetic energy of the warheads was absorbed, erased from the equation of the universe as if they had never been launched. The silencer vessel was not armored. It was a localized null field. It did not resist force. It unmade it. Impacts negative, all munitions erased on contact, the tactical officer reported, his professional calm finally shattering. It's not slowing down. 20 minutes to atmospheric entry. Inside the matrix. Eris felt the shift as a seismic shock. The subtle conceptual pressure of the null wave was gone, replaced by a singular, overwhelming broadcast of pure, focused intent annihilation. He was no longer fighting a creeping fog, but a spear aimed at the heart of his world. The entity descending from orbit was a physical extension of the silencer's will, and he could feel its cold, deadening presence even through the interface. It was coming for the Matrix. It was coming for him. He had a choice to make. He could continue his defense of the abstract, broadcasting humanity's stories and myths to keep the conceptual ghosts of the lost cities alive, or he could turn his newfound power in the Matrix towards the immediate physical threat. He could be a poet, or he could be a sword. He looked in his mind's eye at the shimmering afterimages of London, Moscow, and Beijing. They were beautiful, defiant echoes of what had been lost, but they were only echoes. He thought of the grim, determined faces of Rostova and the Chimera staff, of the sterile, cold bunker that was now the last bastion of his species. They were real, they were alive, and they were about to be extinguished. The choice was clear. Rostova. Eris's voice, strained and thin, crackled over the command center speakers for the first time since he had entered the interface. It was a ghost speaking from the machine. Their weapon. It operates on a principle of conceptual erasure. Physical force is useless. You are firing bullets into a void. Rostova stepped towards the speaker. Aris, what do you need? I need you to give me control, he rasped. Not just of the matrix, of the site, the geothermal core, the atmospheric processors, the defense grid, everything. I can't block their spear, but I can build a shield. It was an unprecedented request, a demand for absolute authority over the most advanced and powerful facility on Earth, handed to a man who was, for all intents and purposes, a disembodied consciousness. For a moment, the room was silent, save for the hum of the computers. Every eye was on Director Rostova. Her entire career had been built on control, on compartmentalization, on fail-safes. Handing over the keys to the kingdom to a ghost in the machine was an act of terrifying, absolute faith. She did not hesitate. It's done, she said. Site Kronos is yours. Show them what a librarian can do. Eris dove deep into the systems of the bunker, his consciousness now a torrent of pure data. He was no longer just a storyteller, he was an architect, an engineer, a god of the machine. He saw the immense, all-seething heart of the geothermal tap that powered the facility, a direct line to the planet's molten core. He saw the network of cryo-emitters and atmospheric processors that maintain the delicate balance of life deep beneath the ice. And he saw the useless Aegis cannons, their raw power a child's toy against this new enemy. He didn't need to fire a weapon. He needed to change the very nature of the battlefield. He began to issue commands at the speed of thought, not as a human operator, but as the central nervous system of Site Kronos itself. He rerouted trillions of watts from the geothermal core, not to the cannons, but to the network of atmospheric emitters scattered across the plateau. He began pumping super-chilled, hyper-condensed liquid nitrogen into the air, creating a massive, instantaneous storm. The temperature on the surface plunged to 200 degrees below zero. The air itself began to crystallize, but that was just the beginning. Using the facility's powerful magnetic resonance arrays, he started manipulating the ice sheet itself. He was not melting it. He was changing its quantum state, vibrating the crystalline structure of the ice on a massive scale. The entire Antarctic plateau, a continent of solid water, began to resonate like a tuning fork. He was turning a passive landscape into an active, conceptual weapon. As the silencer vessel descended through the upper atmosphere, it encountered not a hail of missiles, but a blizzard of impossible physics. The air was a maelstrom of solidifying gases. The ground below it was a vibrating, semi-solid wave of resonating ice. The very reality it was entering was becoming unstable, chaotic, and complex. It was entering a space that was not empty, but was instead saturated with a defiant, irrational, and deeply complicated physical truth. The vessel's advance slowed. Its perfect, fractal form began to flicker, its own reality-negating field struggling to process the sheer informational density of the environment Eris had created. It was like trying to erase a symphony by deleting one note at a time while the orchestra played faster and faster. Eris pushed harder. He took the final, insane step. He used the Mnemosyne Matrix, the repository of humanity's soul, and projected it outwards, not as a story, but as a physical principle. He imbued the storm and the vibrating ice with the raw, chaotic energy of human art and emotion. The ice storm became a physical manifestation of Guernica's rage. The vibrating resonance of the ice sheet took on the transcendent, defiant harmony of Ode to Joy. He was fighting a weapon of pure logic with a weapon of pure, weaponized soul. The silencer vessel shuddered violently. Cracks of pure light, like flaws in a black diamond, spiderwebbed across its surface. It was an entity designed to operate in a universe of predictable, simple laws. Eris had turned the battlefield into a poem, a painting, a madman's dream. It could not compute. It could not adapt. With one final titanic effort of will, Eris focused the entire resonance of the ice sheet into a single, focused pulse, a chord of planetary defiance aimed at the heart of the vessel. For one silent, eternal moment, the world held its breath. Then, with a scream that was not heard, but felt, a psychic shockwave that vibrated in the bones of every person in the bunker, the silencer vessel shattered. It did not explode into fire and debris. It broke apart into a million shards of silent, black glass, each one a fading fragment of a failed equation, which then dissolved into the raging, art-fueled blizzard and were gone. In the command center, a stunned silence gave way to a single, choked cheer, which grew into a roar of disbelief and relief. They had faced a god, and they had won. But Eris did not share their triumph. As the vessel broke apart, he felt a final, spiteful pulse of information lash out from it, not at the Matrix, but directly at him. It was a single, clear, and terrifying message. An image burned into his mind. It was a star map, and on it, a single line was drawn. It started at a distant, unknown galaxy, and it ended at Earth. This vessel had not been an army. It had been a scout, and it had just sent a message home. The real war was not over. It was just beginning. The silence that followed the victory was deeper and more terrifying than the one the enemy had tried to impose. In the command center of Site Kronos, the cheers had died in the throats of the Chimera staff, replaced by a stunned, hollow reverence. They had stared at the empty sky on their monitors, a sky scrubbed clean of the geometric nightmare, and realized they had not witnessed a battle, but a miracle performed by a ghost. Their weapons, their training, their 70 years of preparation had amounted to nothing. They had survived because one quiet man had turned their planet into a song, and their enemy had not known how to listen. Then, Eris's voice had returned, a thread of static and pain woven through their comm systems. He had not spoken of victory. He had shown them the star map. He had shown them the line drawn from a galaxy of black stars to their own small, blue world. He had given them the translation of the scout's final, spiteful message, a simple, devastating data packet containing Earth's coordinates, its conceptual vulnerabilities, and a single, chilling designation, Chorus Animalia, a choir of chaos, a symphony to be silenced. The weight of that knowledge crushed the nascent hope. They had not repelled an invasion. They had merely angered an exterminator. The scout was a footnote. The true work of the silencers, the patient, inexorable cleansing of discordant realities, was now aimed squarely at them. And Eris, their savior, was gone. The man was a ghost. His consciousness inextricably fused with the Nemazan matrix and the very bedrock of the Antarctic continent. He could no longer be unplugged. He was the living, breathing soul of Site Kronos, a lonely god in a cold machine. In the weeks that followed, a new kind of silence fell over Chimera. The silence of despair. Rostova convened the remnants of global leadership generals without armies and presidents without nations in the sterile briefing rooms deep beneath the ice. They drew up plans born of a dead paradigm. They spoke of building fleets of ships armed with reality-anchoring warheads, of constructing orbital defense grids that could project null entropy fields. They were sharpening spears to fight a tidal wave. It was during one such meeting that Eris intervened again. His voice did not come from a speaker, but resonated softly in the minds of everyone in the room, a shared thought that was both intimate and profoundly alien. "You are trying to build a better wall," he communicated, the concept arriving fully formed, tinged with a great and terrible sadness. "They are not an army. They are a principle of physics. They are the universal tendency toward simplicity. You cannot defeat entropy with a gun." A grizzled Russian general slammed his fist on the table. "Then what do we do? Ghost. Do we simply lie down and allow ourselves to be forgotten?" "No," Aris replied, his thought voice growing stronger, clearer. "You do not build a wall to stop a tide. You learn to speak its language. You become the ocean." He laid out his proposal then, a plan so audacious, so terrifying in its scale and its ethical implications, that it made the silencer's quiet erasure seem almost merciful. He called it the Symphony Protocol. The silencers were repelled by dense, irrational, complex information, the very essence of life and art. His victory against the scout had been a desperate, concentrated burst of this principle. But a burst was not a permanent defense. To survive what was coming, humanity itself had to change. It had to become the weapon. "I can touch the entire world from this place," Aris explained, the scope of his new existence becoming clear. "The Matrix is not just a library. It is a resonant chamber. I can use it to broadcast a signal, not of sound or light, but of pure, organized complexity, a subtle, conceptual frequency woven into the background radiation of the planet, into the very hum of your technology. It will not be mind control. It will be an invitation." He proposed to spend the next 50 years the estimated travel time of the Silencer Armada in a great work. He would subtly nurture and accelerate human evolution, not of the body, but of the soul. He would broadcast the foundational principles of art, the paradoxes of philosophy, the elegant chaos of higher mathematics, directly into the subconscious of the species. He would encourage dreams, foster irrationality, and reward creative leaps of logic. He would turn the planet into a conceptual greenhouse, force growing a civilization so vibrant, so chaotic, so breathtakingly complex, that when the great null wave of the silencers arrived, it would find a world not just anathema to its purpose, but fundamentally incomprehensible. Rostova's blood ran cold. "You are talking about rewriting us," she said, her voice a harsh whisper. "You would be a puppeteer, pulling the strings of every artist, every scientist, every child who has a strange dream. You would be no better than them." "The difference," Eris countered, his thought, laced with the pain of his own lost humanity, "is that I am not offering the peace of silence. I am offering the cacophony of choice. I will give humanity new tools of thought, new colors for their emotional palette, new notes for their songs. What they build with them will be their own. It is a terrible risk. It may drive some mad. It may create wonders we cannot imagine. But it is the only path that does not end in a perfect, featureless silence. The leaders argued for 3 days. It was a debate about the very definition of free will, about the soul of a species. But against the certainty of absolute erasure, the terrifying hope of Eris's plan was the only option left. With a heavy heart, Eva Rostova, the woman who had dedicated her life to control and containment, gave the final authorization. She became the guardian of the ghost, the high priestess of a secret, global project to remake the human mind. The great work began. The next 50 years were a strange and beautiful fever dream. There was no overt sign of Aris's influence, no booming voice from the heavens. There was only a quiet, accelerating cascade of human brilliance. It started in the arts. A musician in the rebuilt ruins of Berlin composed a symphony that observers swore could alter the flow of time. A painter in a Lagos shantytown created works that seemed to hold more than 3 dimensions, her canvases portals to impossible geometries. Then it bled into the sciences. A 14-year-old girl in Brazil solved quantum gravity with a theory she claimed came to her in a dream, a theory that treated the universe not as a machine of laws, but as a self-aware poem. Technology followed, evolving in strange, organic directions. Buildings were grown, not built, their internal structures mimicking the elegant logic of cellular life. Computers began to operate on principles of intuition and paradoxical logic. Humanity rebuilt its world, but it was not the world that had been broken. It was stranger, more vibrant, more deeply interconnected. A form of low-grade, passive telepathy became common, not as spoken words, but as a shared emotional understanding, a sympathetic resonance that made large-scale conflict nearly impossible. Children were born with an innate grasp of the beautiful, terrifying complexity of existence. They were a generation that did not fear the void between the stars, for they could feel the music in it. Rostova aged, her iron-gray hair turning to snow, her severe face softening with a kind of weary wonder. She was the only one who knew the full truth, the secret conductor of their global symphony. She would spend her evenings in the cold observation deck of Site Kronos, speaking to the silent, shimmering sphere of the Matrix, reporting the progress of their species to the man who was now its guardian spirit. She told him of the new cities that sang with light, of the philosophies that embraced contradiction, of the love stories that spanned dimensions. And he would listen, his consciousness a vast, silent presence that held them all, a lonely titan bearing the weight of their beautiful, chaotic future. On the 50th year, to the day, it came. It was not a fleet. It was a wave, a ripple in space-time, a front line of absolute nullity that advanced at the speed of light. It was the great null wave, the final perfect expression of the silencer's purpose. It washed over Pluto first. The dwarf planet did not explode. It simply ceased to have ever been. Its orbit, its gravity, its very history were plucked from the fabric of the solar system, leaving a seamless, unblemished void. It erased Neptune, then Uranus. It was not a force, it was an edit, a cosmic delete key pressed against their solar system. On Earth, no alarms blared. There was nothing to detect, but everyone felt it. Every man, woman, and child looked up at the sky, not with fear, but with a strange, collective sense of anticipation. They felt the approaching silence as a dissonant chord in the symphony of their existence. On the observation deck, an ancient Eva Rostova stood, her frail hand resting against a cold console. Aris, She whispered, "It's here." "I know," his thought replied, calm and immense as a galaxy. "Listen, the great null wave hit the orbit of Saturn, and it stopped. It was not a collision. It was a cognitive failure. The wave of pure, simple silence encountered a solar system that was no longer a quiet collection of rocks and gas orbiting a star. It had encountered the chorus animalia, the resonant field of humanity's new consciousness, amplified by Eris and the Matrix, had saturated the entire system. The orbits of the planets were no longer just predictable ellipses of gravity. They were the rhythm section of a grand symphony. The asteroid belt was not a field of debris. It was a complex cascade of competing melodies. The solar winds were not particles. They were harmonies. And Earth was the singer, the silencer's wave. A being of pure, irreducible logic could not process it. It was trying to delete a single file, only to find the file was an infinitely recursive, self-creating operating system that was now the very architecture of the computer. The sheer, weaponized beauty of what humanity had become was a paradox that the wave's consciousness could not resolve. It was a question that broke the mind of the god of silence. The wave fractured. It broke apart like a pane of glass struck by an impossible note. The front line of nothingness shattering into a billion harmless shards of confused entropy, which then dissolved back into the void. Across the planet, humanity exhaled a breath it didn't know it had been holding. They had not fought. They had not even defended. They had simply been, in all their newfound, glorious complexity. And it had been enough. In the bunker, Eva Rostova smiled, a single tear tracing a map of wrinkles down her cheek. She had lived to see the dawn. "You did it, Aris," she thought, her mind reaching out to him one last time. "You saved us." Aris's consciousness filled her own, not with words, but with a feeling of profound, bittersweet peace. He showed her a final vision. He showed her humanity, this new, strange, beautiful species, stepping out from their cradle. He showed them building ships that sailed on currents of music, powered by engines of pure imagination. He showed them leaving their silent solar system not as conquerors, but as artists, as storytellers, ready to paint their magnificent, chaotic truths onto the vast, empty canvas of the universe. He was no longer Eris Thorne, the quiet historian of silence. He was the anchor, the resonance, the first note in humanity's new song. He was forever bound to the machine, the silent guardian at the heart of the symphony, a ghost who had taught his species not just how to survive, but how to sing a song so loud and so beautiful that the silence itself had been forced to listen, and then to flee. And as the first of the new human starships left orbit, a flicker of light against the darkness, he felt a sensation he had not felt in 50 years, a feeling that was the antithesis of silence. It was joy.